Any discussion of JavaScript fundamentals must include an introduction to objects, because JavaScript's fundamental data type is the object. Now, objects are simply a collection of values. The variables we've been looking at so far, they've contained a single value. Well, an object allows you to contain multiple values. Those values could be primitive data types, like we discussed already. Those primitive data types in an object are called properties. They can be a function, which a function tied to an object is called a method. They could be arrays, or they could be other types of objects. So an object can contain a lot of different types of other values. So we have here a sample object. We are referencing this object using the name user1. So that's how we're going to reference this object. Just as with primitive data types that are assigned to variables, you have to have some way to reference them. That's true for objects as well. Now, let's use, for this example, this object is going to keep data about a user. And so all the data attached to that object is going to be about a user. And so this happens to be user1. So let's look at some of the data we could have associated with this object. We could have a username. Now, since an object is a collection of values, we need a way to refer to those values. So each value is given a name. In this case, the name of the value is username. The value is John. We call those collection of values in an object name-value pairs, because they consist of both a name and a value. So the first data attached to this sample object we're looking at is the username. The value is John. The next name-value pair is age. The value is 32. Address, the value is 100 South Main. City, the value is Salt Lake City. So far, this object has 4 name-value pairs. Now let's look at a name-value pair that contains different information, in this case, a function. So the name is full address. The contents, or the value associated with that name, is a function definition. So we could execute that function by referring to the object and then referring to the name associated with that function. One more example of data associated with this object. Let's say we're keeping track of comments made by this particular user. Well, in this case, we could use an array. So an array could be associated with an object as well. And once again, it's stored as a name-value pair. So the value doesn't have to simply be a primitive like we had with the name-value pairs at the top of the object. It can be more than that. It could be a function, it could be an array, it could be another object even. Now in JavaScript, when we want to refer to a value that's a part of one of these name-value pairs, we need to reference the name of the value, and we do that using dot notation. There's actually a couple ways to do that, but right now we'll just introduce dot notation, and then later in the course we'll talk about another method for doing this. The way dot notation works is it's done by referencing the object first and then the name of the name-value pair. So if we wanted to extract the username from this particular object, we would do user1.username. To show this sample in a JavaScript statement, we can use console.log. So it would be console.log user1.username, and that would display the username. That's the basic way you use dot notation to access the name-value pairs that are part of an object. We've seen an example of this with the string data type. Now, a string is a primitive, it's not an object, but strings are given an object wrapper, and so it allows you to do some additional things with them. If you remember, we determined the length of a string, and we did that using dot notation. So let me open up the console. Let me clear this out. Let me create a string. And now we can get the length of that string using dot notation. We specify the variable, then the term length, and it will return the length of that string. This is using dot notation. The same sort of dot notation is available for us with objects. Now the details about how to define an object and how to work with objects will come later as we deal with objects. However, there are a couple of built-in objects we will be talking about in this fundamental section, and that's the date object and the math object. So let's take a look at those.